Hi, good evening. Welcome. We're glad you were able to take some time this evening to join us. I'm Alyssa DeFilippo, Program Manager for Parents Helping Parents Connections California, which is our online statewide resource and information hub for transition to adulthood and adult services. So if you wanted to know how to improve IEP outcomes with targeted transition planning, you are at the right place. Now, this evening is going to be a little bit different of a format because we do not have a PowerPoint presentation, so you will not be receiving slides tomorrow, but the presentation will be recorded and it will be up in our video library probably within 2 weeks. So, with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker this evening. David Tollner, who brings extensive trial experience as a litigator, unique knowledge of special education services, and a formidable passion to his special education practice. David has served as executive director of the Pacific Autism Center for Education and Rebecca Children's Services. David founded Tollner Law Offices in 2007 and has since built it into one of the largest disability law firms in Northern California, serving children and adults with special needs. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to David. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you to Parents Helping Parents, one of my favorite all-time organizations associated with supporting parents and families with kids with learning differences. And you guys are, and particularly adults as well. You guys are fantastic. You've been fantastic for the 30 years I've been in this business, 20 as a special ed attorney and 10 or so before that with Pace and Rebecca. So glad always to be a part of your organization, Alicia. So thank you for everything that you do. All right, everyone, good evening. Thank you for being here. We're going to talk about transition planning, which in California now starts as of July 1 in ninth grade. It used to start when the IEP, when a student was 15 years old. We wanted to start transition planning in advance of their 16th birthday, which is too late in many circumstances. And now we've kicked that about a year earlier. So in ninth grade, the IEP in ninth grade is when you should be having these conversations with your IEP team. All right. And it is, as if any of you have already dealt with this, it is one of the most common violations in all of special ed. We see it in almost every case, no matter what the fact pattern is. When we get to the transition plan, it is almost there's almost a violation in every situation, right? You typically, what they will do is they'll ask 3 questions of a student. What do you want to do after graduation? Do you want to work? If so, what do you want to do? Where do you plan on living? And that's it. They'll get 3 questions. This is the extent of most assessments that we see. And the student will give an answer, and there will be a single page. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. It's got those 3 boxes, and one of them is education, one of them is work, and one of them is life skills and or independent living. And the student will answer that, and they'll throw that in the IEP as a single document of a 35 or 40-page document, and very little, if anything else, will happen. And so what I'm here to tell you is that doesn't have to be the case. And once you start to drive the district off that, and we'll talk about how to do that, there's an awful lot of opportunity in this transition planning. All right. One, the district has to do age-appropriate transition or use age-appropriate transition assessments. There is no recognized assessment that the district has to do. And so they do the minimum, as we see again and again and again from in almost every sector. And it's not to say that asking, a set of questions on a single page isn't enough. The violations rarely come from poor assessments, although sometimes they do. it comes from everything stopping there, right? And for example, one of the things you want to look for in every transition assessment and every transition plan is a goal associated with that plan, with that where your student wants to be when they graduate from high school, all right, or get a certificate from high school. Because you need, as a parent, to be looking well in advance, sometimes well before ninth grade, and we'll talk about the necessity of that depending on your student. But if you've come to the conclusion that graduation with a diploma from high school is unlikely for your student, and you come to that conclusion in elementary school or middle school, ideally your thinking goes from graduation with a diploma to a transition plan, which can start earlier than ninth grade if it's appropriate to do so. So keep that in mind, depending on your student. If graduation with a diploma is unlikely for your child, and what you really want to do is develop the life skills necessary for your child to have a job, some job, any job, but depending on the skills associated or the characteristics of your child's disability, right? Or you want your child to go to an A through G UC school, right? And you want everything to be directed there because that's what your child wants. The sooner you think about transition planning, particularly if you're not thinking about a diploma, the better. Because the earlier a district starts to look at life skills, the earlier they start to look at employment skills that are necessary for your child to have meaningful adulthood, the more skills your child is going to have once he or she gets there, right? So that's important. Look at transition planning in light of your own child's situation and look at it as early as you care to, even if your child's not in ninth grade, if you've come to the realization that the diploma track is not for your child. All right. And then now you're in ninth grade. Now you're looking at a transition plan. Now you're thinking about what does my child do when he gets out of high school? And you want to have, when you think about what goals are there, let's say your child wants to be independent, but he's very much not ready for that. He's not ready to have a job. He's not ready to listen to somebody tell him or her what to do, right? Not ready to spend full-time or even part-time at employment interacting with humans on a regular basis if that's the job that they want. Right? So those are the things that you're looking at that are critical for your student to be better at if they're going to do what it is you want them to do and what they want to do moving forward. And so what you want to make sure your IEP has as part of that IEP is an individual goal for each of those three transition subjects, right? Post-secondary education, post-secondary work, post-secondary independent living. And so, because now we're starting in ninth grade, what you want to do, which is critical to success in this area, is you want those goals to more or less divide up the 4 years of high school. All right. My son doesn't want to go to college, but he wants to have a job, and we want him to have a job, and he wants to have a job that's meaningful. And although obviously we have lots of things to get through, there are lots of struggles associated with the challenges associated with that child's disability. Nevertheless, we want him to be ready or her to be ready to work. So what you need to do as a parent when you come to that realization as early as ninth grade or earlier is very much what we do with kids with learning disabilities, let's say dyslexia, right? We divide up the time we have left, and everything that we do, we focus on closing that gap. So if it's a work skill or a series of work skills, then okay, a ninth grade, and you recognize there's a long way to go to get your child ready for graduation, that first year goal should be an aggressive goal getting your child ready, thinking, okay, now if he meets this goal in ninth grade, then 10th grade's goal will be an extension of that, more aggressive, getting him ready. The same with junior year and same with senior year. If you're anticipating, and many kids, even if they graduate with a certificate and not a diploma, many of my clients and many of your children will want to be done with high school. They won't want to stay after. But that's okay as long as you are early in your assessment of what your child needs to be successful after high school and you start that process early. So do not, when you get to ninth grade in high school, if this is a concern for you, right? What does post-secondary look like in terms of education, work, and independent life skills? If that's the direction you really want to focus on, what you can't let stand is that one-page transition plan and nothing else, right? You spend 3 minutes on it at an IEP meeting and you move forward with everything else that you're talking about at the IEP. Spend time with that transition plan. Ask the district, because they need to create individual goals for every one of those three categories, and potentially, if necessary, multiple goals for each of those, if that's what's necessary to get your child ready for whatever that post-secondary life looks like, right? What a mix of what they want, what you want, and what the IEP team thinks is an appropriate 4-year plan, right? Or an appropriate post-secondary plan. So it starts early. If you have a kid that's highly impacted on the spectrum and nonverbal, it could start much, much earlier. Many parents, I've been doing this a long time, and particularly in the autism world, and I'm married to a speech therapist who started long before even I did. And one of the things we often talk about is how it's really, and I was talking about this with Alicia before we came on, how it's really hard for parents sometimes to move off the academic track for good reason. We want, right? We all want our children to be successful in school, and we all want them to go to college, or many of us do. And when that dream ends, it's really hard sometimes to turn that focus. And we see parents, with kids that really are unlikely to graduate with a diploma, hold on to that academic side potentially too long. So just be careful about that. If you have a child where graduating with a diploma is unlikely, then start thinking early about what transition planning your child needs so that they're independent livers. In other words, they can live in an apartment, maybe with an adult support, something you get from the regional center or Department of Rehabilitation. There's not as much as we get from school districts, but there are services and agencies that support adults. And we want to make sure we're heading in the right direction and your child has the skills to be a successful independent adult if at all possible. And that can start much earlier than even ninth grade. All right. So what you want to be thinking about, and we have a limited period of time. I know I'm talking faster than I potentially would otherwise, but it's hard not to with just another 15 minutes of overview of this. What you're looking for from the district is a results-oriented process, right? We want that out of the IEP in total, but we don't get it as often as we'd like. And we almost never get it when it comes to transition planning. So when you really have to say to the district, all right, here's our plan. How are we getting there? And what services and supports are you going to provide to my child to make sure he meets those goals, that he arrives at certification or a diploma with the requisite skills that he or she needs to be successful as an adult. And if they don't have that, then look outside your district and identify agencies, and there's quite a few, not as many as I would like, of course, never are. But there are some out there that are really good at that are designed to get your child ready for post-secondary life. And a perfect example that I am a big fan of is Evo Libre. And Jan Johnson Taylor does a wonderful job there, and it's something to look at if you're looking for post-secondary skills in high school. Because if the district does not provide the supports and services to meet those 1 year goals, right? Now you're in ninth grade. Now you're doing a transition plan. Now you have a 1 year goal. By sophomore year, a year after that IEP, your child is no closer to meeting that goal and getting ready for graduation than he was a year ago. That's a sign for you that we're not providing a result-oriented process. We've sort of created this plan. This is what happens often, and then nobody steps up to actually get your child ready. So you then have to tell the district, what are you doing? We've made no progress in that direction. And if they don't have something, and very few districts do, you then have the opportunity, and this is a little bit outside this, but it's also critical to understanding your rights, is you have the opportunity to find an agency or a service outside of the district that will provide the supports that your child needs to meet his or her goals and get ready for the transition. And then what you do with that in advance of spending a dime is you make sure you give notice, right? It's a very important concept in special ed, and that is when a district doesn't do what they're required to do under the law, either the IDEA or California law, which is very close, and with regards to transition services and plans, California law is even stronger than the IDEA, which is a rarity, right? Typically, it mirrors the IDEA, but with transition planning, it is even stronger. So if you have a transition case, you're more likely to actually use California law than you will federal law because it's in your favor. And again, your idea is to give notice 10 days or 2 full weeks before you spend any money, before you start an outside service, explain why you're doing it in writing, and then you can start with that service after that 2 week period. You can also give notice, add an IEP, and then start that service the next day. Those are your two options. But very often, what we see with transition planning and what you need to be ready to deal with is that districts do a very poor job of providing the supports and services necessary to drive progress over the course of what is now a 4 year plan. So you need to be ready to take that into your own hands, find the service that works for your child, and get your child heading in that direction at public expense, right? That's the nature of unilateral placement at public expense. You're telling the district, you're not doing your job, so I have to do it for you, and I'm going to be seeking reimbursement from you into the future. Then what you can do if you don't want to hire counsel to get reimbursed, you file what's called mediation only with the district when you're ready to be reimbursed. Remember, there's a 2 year statute of limitations, so don't wait too long. And then hopefully you'll be able to negotiate a settlement that is reasonable. All right, so that's some of the practical stuff. Right. So here are some of the things, particularly in California, if you want to look at the statute, it's Education Code 56460 et al., which means there's more after that. You can read it all. And school districts must establish capacity for transition services for a wide range of students, which will definitely include yours, that includes after high school employment, academics, strategic planning for life plans. They need to have interagency coordination, which means if they can't do it, they need to come in with somebody who can. And it includes even parent training. What do you need to know to make sure your child gets to the end of high school and is ready to move forward? What can you be doing at home? What training could you use to make sure your child is heading in the right direction? All right, so that's the basic. Obviously, the devil sometimes can be in the details, but what we see often is that one page. And if part of what you need to focus on to make your child's IEP an effective one is what happens post high school. And not all of our clients, that's what they're interested. Most of our clients are, they've had a long series of mostly academic and or social and or emotional health issues and deficits with a very little bit of progress, if any, sometimes significant regression over time. And that's what we end up focusing on. But then in many of our cases, what we end up doing is looking at the transition plan, recognizing the level of violation there, and then using that to get what we want, not only in the district at that time, right, to drive academics and drive a better high school experience, but also really looking post high school and getting the district to step up and see it as part of their obligation. Strangely, it is not without you telling them that it's part of their obligation, or somebody like me. Very rarely do we see internally that they take that seriously, right? So you have to, because once you do, and hopefully maybe have an advocate, not an attorney necessarily, but an advocate, and or you bring in somebody like Evo Libri or another outside agency, and they can help you talk about what is needed to get your child ready. Now you've focused on that issue, which the district doesn't want to focus on, and you're very likely looking at a level of violations that can be very effective as to what you get thereafter. In other words, if you get to the end of sophomore year and they've done nothing with transition, now you've got a comp ed case that theoretically is going to legally support whatever service you go out and get yourself and pay for yourself, and then request reimbursement for. All right, because they're not doing what they're supposed to do. You have the right, after giving notice, to do it for them and then get reimbursed. Obviously, from a legal perspective and a law firm's perspective, that's a lot of what we do, is getting parents reimbursed. First, teaching them that they can do this, go outside the district to get services that their child needs, and then supporting them through reimbursement for those services. All right, and that goes all the way through age 22. Some of you may not know that yet, but that's an important distinction. The district's obligation is through age 22 for all students that don't graduate with a diploma. And if your child needs an extra year or two to graduate with a diploma, we very often will use the transition plan when it comes up and the opportunity arises to keep academics moving forward, to keep obviously transition services moving forward until the student is ready to graduate with a diploma, not necessarily in 4 years. It can be 5 years, it can be 6, it can be 7, it could be 8. And if graduating with a diploma is what your child wants and what you want for them, and there's a reasonable avenue to get there, we do not have to let a district, and we very often fight graduation with a diploma before the child is ready for post-secondary life, right? I'm going to say that again. Just because the district thinks your child is ready for a diploma, right? If they aren't ready for everything else, we can continue in the high school system for, and depending on the high school, and typically there's more money in the K-22 system than there is in the adult system thereafter. You can continue using the transition plan to keep your child in high school until ready for post-secondary life in all three categories, right? School, life skills, and work skills. So keep that in mind if that's where you're headed. I will restate, however, most kids and adults, but the kids really are driving this. After 4 years of high school, many just want to go, and fighting that can be very difficult, which is why starting your transition planning in ninth grade now, which is your legal right, is a good way to go. That's 4 solid years where you're thinking about, and the whole team is on an annual basis at least, thinking about What do we need to get Johnny ready for graduation? All right. So you've got more power in this transition plan than you think you do. It's not something that the districts are going to tell you. It's something you're going to learn in a conference like this, quite frankly, because very few parents are focused on that piece, and the districts are just not going to tell you that that's a focus that is an important one, and that they have obligations there. All right, a couple more points, and then I think we'll open it up for questions. I know that was quick. I know that's a lot of information. I'm assuming there are lots of questions out there because I could only cover so much, but that gives you a good, at least a basic foundation, I hope, that can be useful for you. All right, couple other things. And I want to reiterate this. If you have a transition plan, and if you're on an IEP, you should, as early as your ninth grade IEP, make sure the goals associated with that transition plan are not in a transition plan. Make sure they're part and adopted by the goal section that is typical that you've all seen as part of your child's IEP. I want those goals, and I'm constantly asking my districts, I want those goals with all the other goals. They're as important, if not more important, than all the others. I don't want them separated out into some one or two, sentence goal that is written as part of the one-page transition plan. I want a baseline with the skill that you're looking at improving, because the baseline, and I want an accurate baseline because that baseline is the most important part of the goal. And then I want a goal that is an apples to apples comparison to that baseline. And I want that goal to be aggressive in 1 year's time. Because again, we are condensing what might be 5, 6, 7 years worth of services into 4 potentially, and we have to close that gap considerably for some of our kids from freshman year to senior year, right? So aggressive goal in the goal section of the IEP, so that everybody who looks at that IEP every year or multiple times each year is focused on that goal as much as they are on any of the other goals that are of interest to you and your child. All right. And then go out, and this I tell every single client, and so certainly is appropriate for you. Know what's in your area. There is no substitute for any parent with a child on an IEP unless things are going swimmingly year after year and you have zero worries and everything is going great. Everything is exactly as you want that IEP process to be, which is unusual. So if you're having any struggles at all with your IEP, know what's available in your area. Don't leave it for anybody else to tell you, because nobody else will, at least not at the district. Go online, Google search, talk to somebody like me, know what's available so that you're ready when the time comes. And here, somebody like me may very well eventually tell you, you have a legal opportunity here that is significant. District has dropped the ball. They've done very little on transition. They haven't created goals. There's been no progress. Now, if I see that fact pattern, I'm telling my client, go find what's in your community. And when I say your community, I mean sometimes within 45 minutes or an hour's drive, depending on where you live. And let's look at whether that service or that support is what your child needs to make meaningful progress on these goals, these transition goals in particular. And if so, and you think that's where my child needs to be to make progress on those goals, we give notice and away we go. Evo Libre, I believe, is certified. It's one of the ones that is. So what that tells you, because it's certified, is you can get the district to actually offer Evo Libre services on an IEP as part of the offer of FAPE in association with the transition plan. That's a huge advantage. If you can get the district to do that because they don't have internal programming that can lead to meaningful progress for your child, then that becomes another avenue, another option that the district can take advantage of. And you definitely want to be looking at those options and telling the district about them, because they won't be reaching out to you in most circumstances to inform you of that reality, right? Of the existence of these agencies that are expensive in some cases and that they don't want to pay for. All right. And then again, like everything else, rule number one, with any IEP, not just transition IEPs, give notice of recording, record everything. Do not go to another IEP meeting that you do not give 24-hour notice that you're going to record, and then record that meeting. That is absolutely essential to IEP outcomes in so many ways. I can't tell you here because it's a touch outside our topic, but it's worth noting again. And then, of course, before you spend a dime on a private service that the district isn't giving you, give notice of unilateral placement at public expense so that you withhold your opportunity to seek reimbursement from the district, particularly when the outside service you've privately paid for after giving notice is driving progress far better and quicker than the district ever did on these series of goals that you're focused on. All right. So that's obviously nutshell or presentation. I hope useful somewhere in there for those of you that are out there. And it's now 7:04, and happy to answer as many questions as I can in what's left of our time, which is about 26 minutes. Hopefully I can get through a few. So if somebody wants to send me a question on the Q&A, I'll read it, and here we go. Or Alicia, you can read it for me, and I'll
Yeah,
answer it
I'll
for
be
you.
happy to facilitate some questions. I'm first going to just thank you for that presentation. So much information in there. I'm taking my own notes. I'm sure everybody was doing the same. Just direct everyone's attention to the evaluation links that I have pasted into the chat. Again, four very simple questions. If you could just, as we're talking throughout the next half hour, if you could just click on it, I'll be watching to see how many of you are actually responding. I tend to be a little annoying. I like to get at least 75% response on the evening of. So I'll be dropping it in periodically and asking you in between questions. So for the first question, if an IEP student is going to be on the alternative diploma track, which maybe you might just want to talk about just a little bit for folks out there who might not know what we're talking about, when would you do a transition assessment? Would you do one in 8th grade and 9th grade? What would you suggest? So first, a little outline of the alternative diploma track. And
So California allows an alternative diploma now, and has for a couple of years or a few. And it means you don't have to meet all the diploma requirements of that school. Typically, you had two options. You had a diploma because you met all the credit requirements and all the various class requirements. And then you have a certification, right? Which is not a diploma. It means you didn't meet the requirements, but it's time for you to leave high school anyway, right? From their perspective. But an IEP gives you more power than that. And now they've added this alternative diploma, which is for kids on an IEP that want to go and get a diploma, but don't have the requirements that they need. And it comes in handy in situations when you want your child to get a diploma from high school, but they're not ready to get a diploma the old-fashioned way. They don't have enough credits. They didn't take the right classes to get there. All right. So it's an opportunity to get a diploma, but it isn't necessarily your best opportunity. For example, we have a case right now. It's not my case, so I can't give you the details, and I wouldn't anyway. But we have a child that went to a certified NPS for high school. They modified the curriculum for that child tremendously. All right. But they graduated that child with a diploma, and they should not have, right? Either as an alternative and or a regular. They graduated the child with a diploma, and that child is as ready to graduate from high school as a 5th grader, a typical 5th grader would be.
Mm.
very behind academics, fully modified curriculum. So we're now in a fight with that district because that diploma came from an outside agency, if you will, a certified program. We're in a big battle with the district who is saying, well, because it came from a certified program, that's a legitimate alternative diploma. And our fight is no, there is nothing, right? That was a diploma that was given just to move this child on, not in anticipation of all the transition needs. So we're about to go to hearing in that in a month, and we'll see how that goes. But there's an example. You don't, depending on your child and their desires, you often don't want your child to graduate with a diploma, and because you don't want to come out of this K-22 system, right? 3 to 22 is the special education window for all kids on IEPs. And you have until 22 unless your child graduates with a diploma. If you can keep your child from graduating with diploma because they're not ready on the transition planning, then some parents really like that idea. And so do we. It's like, wait a second, I've got nothing good happening after high school. All of the funding or much of the funding and the services and supports I need to get him actually ready to graduate from high school are in this setting. The last thing I want is a diploma, even if my child wants it, unless it's so important to your child, because then all of that ends. Now you're in the adult sector, and the adult sector funding, as Alicia will tell you, can sometimes be a struggle, just in terms of getting the amount of funding you need to provide the services to really support the adults. And so we'd like to stay in K-22 or 322. We'd love to stay in that system as much as we can because the law is stronger, IEP system is stronger, the IDEA and Cal Ed Code is stronger before you graduate with a diploma and while you're in that system that allows us to provide the kinds of either private or district services that are necessary to drive the progress we want to see. So don't be so excited about a diploma, alternative or otherwise, or, because if your child's not ready to move on, you don't have to go that route. You can keep your child on a certificate route, which then continues to allow high school-based services or transition services through the age of 22. Not for all kids, but for some of your kids, that's exactly what you're after. So that, when you have a 23-year-old, you're as far ahead of the game in terms of those three areas, right? Maybe not schooling, but certainly independent life skills as much as possible and work skills.
Okay, and the other part of that question was, when would you suggest doing transition assessments?
It depends on your kid. For a child who is diploma disabilities, but on an IEP, but it looks to be on a diploma track, I wouldn't worry about it until ninth grade. Ninth grade is when I would focus. If your child is in a program like PACE, right? So nonverbal, highly impacted by autism, and a diploma is not what you think is a likelihood without some significant changes, then I would be thinking about transition planning as early as possible. I wouldn't necessarily give up on academics, but I would, and I have in the past, tried to get parents to recognize the importance of transition planning as early as fourth, fifth, sixth grade, depending on what we reasonably view as the kind of progress we can look forward to academically. And if that's not significant, but we really want to focus on independence and work skills, that can start as early as middle school or even earlier for the right kids. It's an individual thing. It's hard to, every case is going to be different to answer that question. But so that's a decision you have to make as a parent.
And I guess a question just came in that kind of is in line with that. And a parent's asking, in order for a student to stay longer in the school district, is it necessary to repeat an academic grade? And I'm not sure if we're
No.
talking about certificate or diploma here, but
Um, if they have no intention of graduating with a diploma in 4 years, or you just want to extend, sometimes for kids that are graduating with a diploma that is not alternative, we'll get to senior year and we'll recognize, wait a second, this kid's not ready to graduate at all. They may have, right? Districts are rather fond of moving kids along and giving them passing grades with very little effort. And when we see that, and we see that academically, although we may have enough credits accrued, we just are really not ready to graduate with a diploma and move on, right? The kid's got no skills, so he's going to stay in the home. He's got no opportunity or no social skills, so a roommate or living in an apartment is doesn't look like a going to work. No work skills to speak of. We will slow down that senior year or even the junior year. We will take as few classes as humanly possible. We will focus on the classes that kid is taking, and we will prolong graduation with a diploma as long as we can, because we recognize the diploma is nowhere near as valuable as getting him ready to graduate and then all the other things that life requires at that stage. If your child is heading to a 4-year university out of high school, this is not what you're going to be thinking of. But even with those kids, if there's social issues, if there obviously all of the other IEP issues, whatever eligibility category, very often, even with kids that will graduate with a diploma in 4 years, there can be significant transition planning that is needed. How do we get the child ready if high school is a struggle for something like a 36,000 student college? And if college isn't coming, how do we get them ready for the frustrations and disappointments of work life when somebody tells them to do something and they don't want to do it, right? We have a case right now where we're very focused on the transition plan because the student may graduate with a diploma, really wants to get out of high school, can't wait, but is absolutely nowhere ready to have a job or go to college or live independently. And so we're really turning the focus of that IEP into those issues. And we've got 2 years to do it because this kid, when he turns 18, and here's the other thing, unless you're conserved your child, when they turn 18, and they're unconserved, it's their decision whether they stay in high school or not. And we want to make sure that we're on top of that piece as well, right? That they understand the importance of staying, or if we know that they're going to leave at 18, boy, do we have to condense an awful lot of transition planning and services and supports into a compact period of time.
yeah, I think your point about the alternative pathway and just even the learning disability, that group of students, it's they have a shorter path. That they're gonna
Yep.
graduate with a diploma. They do not qualify for the alternate pathway to diploma, which you can with the alternate pathway to diploma. I think you can stay into the transition program and still get the diploma, but they're not on certificate, they don't qualify for the alternate, and then they're, sitting in front of their computers when they're 35 and their parents are upset because they didn't get this planning that you're talking
That's
about.
exactly right. That's the last thing we want to do is have these kids all go home at 18 and be on their screens nonstop. Uh, and and that's a difficulty. And the sooner we see that that's a likelihood, the more we want to focus on that issue.
Yeah. Um, I- Someone's just asking about 504s. So if you could just touch on, the fact that they don't have the same rights as IEPs,
No,
but,
it's no. The first thing I will tell you about a 504 is get an IEP if you can. Just because that's where all the power is, right? The 504 comes from an old, very successful, wonderful Rehabilitation Act that is now 50 years old, I think. I'm pretty sure it's exactly 50 years old or very near it. and it just doesn't come with the same power as an IEP. The IEP has statutory language that creates pressures within school districts that really make it hard in many cases for them not to go along with what you're demanding, and particularly if it's accompanied by somebody like an advocate or an attorney who knows the law and knows how to present it in a way where the district's hands are tied. The 504 doesn't give you attorney's fees when if you go and win. The pathways are just what is provided in terms of services and supports are non-existent. It's all about accommodations. So it's important sometimes to have a good 504. And if your child just needs extra time on tests or other accommodations, maybe some notes, and then they do really well with that, maybe they don't need an IEP. But in every single case, I'm always driving my clients to get the IEP and not a 504, simply by virtue of the pressures I can bring to bear with an IEP, because the statutory language is so much stronger. With a 504, the district doesn't give accommodations. Yes, you can file against that. If it's a longer process, the end result doesn't get you your attorney's fees back if you have to hire an attorney. It just doesn't give you the power that an IEP does. So, and districts, of course, want you to stay at the 504 level and not get an IEP because they understand that an IEP gives you that power. So fight through it. If eligibility for an IEP is there, but the district is trying to pressure you to get an I-504, stick with the IEP. Fight your way through to an IEP if you have eligibility characteristics sufficient to get you there, and do not settle for a 504. I don't know if that was your 504 question, but that is a very good rule of thumb for whoever asked that question. But if you're in a 504, you have lots of accommodations, things are working well, and you're happy with that. The nice thing about that is if your kid is someone who doesn't want to be a special ed student, right, is going to frown on that nomenclature because we have a number of students in high school that really struggle with, I don't want to be a sped kid. I'm not a sped kid, even though they very much are. Then a 504, if it meets your needs or the needs of your child, can be a very productive way to go. It just doesn't come with much power.
Okay. How about, does the transition plan have to service a specific post-secondary education if that's the student's desire? For example, ASD level 1, 2E student, 18 years old, a senior, wants to be an engineer and has been given supports with AP courses, but
Right.
may now need an additional year to complete courses before being accepted to an engineering program like Cal Poly.
So the question is, can we keep him in high school to get the engineering classes so that he has an opportunity to get into Cal Poly, and that's his
I think that's the
post-secondary
question.
education goal?
Yeah, I think that's the question.
Depending on, I would say yes. The answer is there is an opportunity for that. I would love to look at the credits, how many more credits are needed. You don't want that if it's a boy, you don't want your son to get to where the district can graduate with them with a diploma, not an alternative, not a certification, and because you don't want to have that fight. The fight you want to have is he's not ready to graduate with a diploma. I would rather, in that situation, start to think about the engineering classes that are needed, and I would spread out senior year into 2 years. I would say I would sign up only for the absolute lowest number of classes this year, spread out senior year, so there's no opportunity for the district to graduate with a diploma at the end of the senior year. And then I would have those engineering classes that potentially might be much tougher. So right, not having 5 or 6 other core classes with them is probably a benefit. And then I would have a couple, like one other core class while he's doing engineer first semester, 5th year, and I would do the same second semester, 5th year, and I would spread out this senior year through 2 years to add those helpful engineering classes in his 5th year. And you can do that, right? And that's how I, at least off the cuff, given just a question, that's how I would look at it moving forward. Because if they didn't start, and then I would look at the transition planning. What did they do when he first announced, and how long ago did he announce that he wanted to be an engineer and go to Cal Poly and have the requisite classes for that? Because if they didn't do what they were supposed to do back then, now you've got violations you can use to further your case for a 5th year and those engineering classes he wants.
Okay. I'm just going to draw everybody's attention to the chat where I just placed the English link and the Spanish link for the evaluations. We are so far behind. So if you want to hear more questions and more answers, we need to have more evaluations filled out. So please click those buttons, start filling out the evaluations, and I'll be nice and I'll read another question. But please, I got to see some increases in those evaluation numbers. Thank you. Okay. Perhaps if you can talk about, I think there may be a little bit of confusion. Is it okay that all goals are listed under the 3 categories of the transition plan: education, employment, independent living? And maybe if you could talk a bit more about how those goals and the activities need to be related back to the annual goals. And that is the crux
Right.
of this presentation, is you're talking about how to get those IEP outcomes. So just a little bit about that, maybe.
Well, we just want to get the district. What I see time and time again that you want to knock the district off of is that they separate transition planning and transition goals, right? Those two things go together. Theoretically, they can be on the same sheet. Here's my goal for post-secondary education, and they can write the goal, right? But the reason I don't like that is because it tends to get short shrift when it's separated from the other goals. The other goals we know are is part of what drives the IEP process, right? We have an eligibility category. Now you're on an IEP. Now we look at what are all the deficit areas. We write a goal for each deficit area, and we have a list of goals that are the primary focus, or at least a focus, of each annual IEP. How did we do on last year's goals? Did we meet those goals? If not, how close did we get? And was there meaningful progress even if we didn't meet the goal? And right, that's such a key part of every IEP, that what we see happen in real life is when the district separates those transition goals out into a separate page, we give those goals less attention than we give the other goals. And I don't want that if my transition plan is important to me, and those goals are very important to me, I want them equal to all the other goals in that annual IEP. I don't want them separated. So I would ask the district to take those transition plan 1-page goals that they've created, and I almost never see more than a 1-page transition plan, no matter how complicated a kid is. If there are goals associated, I want them in the goals section. And then I want the goals for the transition plan to be so thought out that I have an accurate baseline that is measurable, like my other goals. I want the aggressive goal as to what I want to see in a 1 year's time to be an apples to apples comparison to the skill we already know, right? Because we have a baseline for. And what's going to happen when you do that is you're going to find that what really is typically missing from a transition goal is an accurate baseline of a skill that where your child is in now. You almost never see that. You'll see it on your academic goals. Right now, Johnny can do, he's a junior, but he's at algebra 1 level in math, or he's 2 or 3 years behind, and you have a very distinct baseline, and then in a year's time we have a very distinct skill level that we want Johnny to get at academically, using math as a simple example. What they won't do with transition planning is create that skill level baseline where I'm at now. They basically will say, well, he'll fill out a couple of resumes, He'll learn how to do a resume. All right, but wait a second. What does he want to do for a living? Where's his skill base for that? All right, let's find out where that skill base is, use it as our baseline, and then what is an aggressive goal in 1 year's time that we want to see Johnny get to? So that, and then in your mind, you're thinking, all right, if he gets to that after freshman year, then I have sophomore year to use to build this important skill. Then I have senior year to junior year to use to build another important skill. And I'm thinking about always, all right, I've got 4 years in high school. How do I divide that up in a way where by the time he's done, he's where he needs to be? It doesn't all have to happen in 1 year. So that's how you go into it. And if you do it as a separate transition plan, that goal-based process that is so important to an IEP, a successful IEP, gets lost. From the baseline to the aggressive goal, that's all lost. Because what you want to do is divide out the skills necessary to get your child to where you want him to be as a senior year, at the end of a senior year in these three transition areas. And then you want to define baseline and an aggressive goal, and they won't do that on the just using the transition plan goals. I just don't see it again and again and again. It's short shift every single time.
Okay, I see by the clock on the screen we have a couple of minutes left here because people know if you're return viewers, I like to start on time and end on time. How do parents get a good transition assessment?
Sometimes they have to go outside. That's a very good question. And I almost feel like I want to give you the answer, Alicia, and have them double back with you to get it. There are good transition assessments, but they're used by the agencies like Evo Libri commonly, and they're significantly more robust than what the district uses. I mean, on a scale of 1,000, but also very, very useful. And so what I would do is go online and look for more robust transition plans, or I would call Evo Libri and start to talk to them about what they offer. What they do there is a far more robust transition plan, which the district should be doing, but we don't have law on it yet that says, we haven't had a court say, you have to do this, 30-page, you have to do this very robust assessment. If they have, I haven't seen it. And so districts get away with the minimum because the law hasn't told them they have to do the maximum yet or something a little more robust. But one of the things you could do is say, that's an inappropriate transition assessment that you've done. We need more than what do you want to do? We need to know where his skill level is now in each of those areas so that we can develop appropriate goals on an annual basis. And there are transition planning assessments out there that you can access. I wish I had their names in mind. I'm afraid I do not.
Yeah, and depending on where, if you are in Parents Helping Parents catchment area, we cover 5 counties. Feel free to call our
Yeah,
Parents Helping. Thank you
great.
so much, everybody. Have a good evening. Take care.
Thank you
See
all.
you next time. Bye-bye.